our efforts to be more sustainable, whether that's through environment or energy or institutions, institution building. And I think most especially, it helps us think about how we can make inclusivity and diversity sustainable here. What are our efforts to actually build upon our growth and our changes in institutions here at so with that, I want to welcome our speaker today. Indira Kaur Ahluwalia is the strategic advisor, coach, activist, author, cancer warrior. She's the founder and chair of the Coalition for Racial and Ethnic Equity and Development, or CREED, a senior advisor at Palladium, and president of Kaur Strategies. She's founded, led, and advised organizations and coached leaders, strengthen equity, effectiveness, and achievement. She leads Kaur Strategies to enable authentic and transformative growth through advisory and coaching services, and has previously founded Development and Training Services Incorporated, and inculcated equality, accountability, and sustainability in over 90 different countries. We are really delighted to have her here today speaking on advancing racial and ethnic equity in international development. So please welcome Indira.
Thank you so much, Graham and Moses, for having me. I am really excited to be on this side of an International Week event. I have very fond memories of being at George Mason and struggling to find speakers and getting speakers aligned and coming on board and getting people in the room and all that feels like a full circle to be standing on this side of the podium, and I don't take that lightly. I know the effort that goes into it and the opportunities we have to bring different people to this. So I'm excited to spend time with you and really make this a discussion. Thank you for the bio. With that, let me just talk a little bit about diversity to begin with, from the perspective of who I am, not just what I am on paper. From that perspective, the first thing I always say when I introduce who I am is that I'm Sikh. And it has become much more relevant to me as I have grown up. I have realized over time that my spirituality comes from that base of Sikhism. My desire to fight for equity every day comes from the values of Sikhism, believing in humanity and all people being equal. My work ethic, to work ethically, to work hard, to work in the material world while still maintaining spirituality, comes from Sikhism. My long hair, or my son's turban and beard, comes from Sikhism. I grew up in a household in Calcutta where my father would start his mornings with prayer. It was never, he never said, come and join me, but it was very present in how I woke up to my consciousness every day. I went from that household to a convent from the time I was 4 to about 15 when I lived in Calcutta. And when I got to the convent, we would pray. On the way to the convent, we would pass a mosque on my left side, a Hindu temple on my right side, and a Sikh temple, a Gurdwara. And as a child, I would follow the right protocol to address each religion. And growing up, I thought, wow, this is really cool. Then one day I asked my mom, am I doing it wrong? Am I being disloyal to my religion? She goes, remember the point about respecting it. You know who you are, but build from that perspective of respect for all. I grew up in a state, West Bengal, which was run by communists, in a country that was run by a very powerful woman who was running one of the biggest democracies in the world. In my household, I had a younger brother, but we were both raised as people, not necessarily as boys and girls. I'm a single mother. I have a daughter who's a student of GW. I have a son who is trying to drive me insane, trying to figure out which college he's finally going to land in by May 1st, including GW. So I had the opportunity to be here as a parent this weekend. To me, diversity is all of this. It's every element of what makes you who you are, including whether you're shy, whether you're tall, whether you have a beard. To me, equality is making the premise that we're coming from a place where the baseline is the same for everybody. And if it is, then it's okay to be whoever you are. It's okay to wear your hair the way you choose to, at work or in school or at home. It's okay to have an accent. It's okay to not raise your hand or to speak up. Equity, on the other hand, to me, is about character. It is about making sure that my return against the same kind of effort that everybody makes is equal to what somebody else's is. Inclusion is a word I don't like, right? I saw this terrific graphic once where it could be said that women were at the table. The women seated on this nice round table were bound and gagged. That's participation. Okay, you can check that box. Women were at the table. So inclusion is similar to that. It's not enough. In this industry, in international development, in a study, the Bridge survey that one of our members from CREED led Shira with a number of other organizations, including Social Impact, and Humentum, and IREX, they found that 4% of men who are 4% of men who are CEOs are BIPOC. 6% of men, 4% of women are BIPOC. 2021. So inclusion doesn't get you sitting at the head of the table always. Belonging is a lot more relevant for me. When I can walk in with my accent, my style of working, my history, my capacity to give the way only I can based on everything that I am, and it's okay for the institution to accept me fully and take advantage of me and still give me an opportunity to rise, then I'm belonging. What really matters also is personal responsibility. We can talk a lot about systemic responsibility when we're building the EIA. It's essential to say, what is your responsibility? You can be who you are, but how do you protect your future? So from that perspective, what I want to think about is, why are we doing this? CREED, DEIA, why now? Why us? And why are we talking? Right? The why now, it's always too little too late. It doesn't matter that we saw what we saw in terms of 2020 and the call to action that some human beings suffering led to. That is happening today, and it's happened multiple times last week and the week. My son, as a 6-year-old, at the TSA in every US airport, since he was six, as a 6, has been randomly searched. These are the realities of how we function and take for granted. The moment has to be taken. And let's be really realistic about this moment. The last administration issued an executive order that disallowed us from working on diversity. We have a small window right now to change the Kool-Aid and to steep the Kool-Aid so much into the operations of who and what we are that one executive order can't cancel it. Why am I talking to you? Because really the baton belongs to the students. It belongs to you because you will have it. And I'm going to hold you accountable. The same way that my daughter has said to me, what are you leaving for? So this is definitely personal. And it's important for us to own that it is personal. It's when it's personal, we put all of ourselves into it. And if we can take responsibility, and we can make the shifts that we think are. So creed is, I was asked in an interview, why did you think you could do creed? And my answer was, why not? I mean, why is it that I have to justify I'm 80? Why is it that we not ask, why did you not do it? So this is how I am expressing my personal responsibility. I've been in the space of building equity as an experience from the time I was a child. I've done it professionally. This is sort of my pay it forward. When we created Creed, I was very clear that equity is the baseline. We're not talking about equality, because the baseline for equality is not the same as the baseline for equity. So the metrics, if you're saying, yes, we're building equality, it's very different from saying we're building equity. Let's look at compensation. I very intentionally chose to focus on racial and ethnic. Certainly, George Floyd is the reason that we're talking about race as openly and honestly as we are right now, even to the extent that we are. Ethnicity, sort of type in, obviously I was being selfish. I understand ethnic experience more than I understand the racial experience. I understand the religious experience. It's that space as we in international development are starting to talk about decolonizing development, that if you don't address the brown and black people in development in your office or in another country, you're not creating designs that are sustainable. Another point of significant debate was, for who? Is this about the global south? And honestly, equity doesn't translate. Okay. What I mean in terms of compensation or belonging or parity or legacy is not the same here or in Nigeria or in Nepal or in Nicaragua. We don't have our. I am not going to be so presumptuous as to go and say to another country, you've got to get your act together. We are barely including people at the table in our office. So this is about us. This is about the audience. This is about GW. It's about every organization that touches creed. We're holding you in that. And the difference is that we fought this as BIPOC. We fought this as HR experts. We fought this as consultants. We have not led this as leaders. It's time. And I don't think I could have done this even with the same passion. Sold ETS in 2015. Let's just say I could do it in 2015. I could do it in 2010 when I was working overseas on building it. I had to do it in this moment where I could call the CEO, had my personal credibility to put online, ask them to put their personal credibility on. So it had to be with the ownership of leaders saying, I'm going to be accountable. And I'm willing to grow and I'm willing to learn. The other aspect of it is if we say we don't have our house in order, then we've got to check which bricks to realign. How do we shift the foundation so that it allows for the structure to be right? So it had to be about policies and systems, had to be about culture. So creed, so people like Kaur were people I had relationships with, people in terms of the core team, in terms of how we created creed. I call people who had a legacy of speaking about these issues. I call people who were unafraid. I call people who put their name against a statement pre-George Floyd, not just on social media. And I honestly was humbled to have the kind of conversations we had. This, I joke, it was a little like sex education. You've got to use the words. You've got to say white privilege. You've got to say Western white centeredness. To me, development is a transaction. We're talking about power shifts. We're talking about money so that we can have markets. It's a transaction. It's not altruistic. If it's altruistic, it's patronizing on the other hand. How do we make this transaction respectful? So I went off on my tangent. But the idea that in development, we could take these stands recognizing the climate we were in, with the Biden administration, with the efforts to decolonize development, with locally led development, and local voice becoming important. It had to be that we wanted to take practical action, not just sign up. It had to be collective, it had to be owned by the people, the 20 organizations that we were soon able to pull together to create a pledge. It was very clear the pledge could not have 27 components, with 26 being low-hanging fruit. I wanted to make sure it was real, that it would work, that a CEO could say to me, yes, I have manageable control over this. We also wanted to make sure while we focused on implementing partners in the US, not even on field offices, we were also bringing the ecosystem of international development in Washington with us. So there are 5 major trade associations. We kept them informed literally on a month-by-month basis. I kept up with USA, with DFC, with MCC, and not necessarily their DEIA leaders, but their front offices. The same difference that we brought to CREEP, that it's not the advocates, it's the leaders we want taking on design and accountability. People fall on this vast spectrum of belief systems. Each person is right. I'm not here to judge. But what I'm not trying to even raise the question if there is racism or to what degree. I'm working on the solution. A solution that people, whether they're an ally, whether they're neutral, whether they're against it, can see material benefit. It's personal, but it's strategic, it's systemic, and it's with respect. So, the pledge itself is a very important indication of the fact that this is a technical skill set. This is not, this is an expertise. It needs to be handled as such at an organizational level. It's not that, hey, can you add this because you happen to be from a particular race or a particular gender to your day job. It is a technical skill set that needs to be considered the same way as creating an ERP system or a diversification effort or retention. It needs money. Right? It needs money and it needs dedicated time. It's also about being on a journey. With the pledge, you don't have to be at point F to get it. You can be at I'm starting to look at the outcome, or I'm at point S. We're all on this journey. Nobody has it right. Nobody will get it right. We want to create a space where it's safe to have this dialogue. My first ambition in doing this, even before we got to the signatories, is that people talk. When we started talking about it, one company in one of the meetings, they called out who posted when as related to George Floyd. We also called out what the BIPOC population was in organizations. There was a lot of pushback. One very large organization changed their website. Instead of their core team showing, they brought in their country directors. That's success. It wasn't that they were uncomfortable. They realized they weren't enough. And it's okay, because in that dialogue is where I learned something, as much as they did. So we're not trying to police this. We're trying to create a safe space to have this discussion without judgment, but we also want to hold people along. With positive reinforcement, what we want to do is create a learning community. And in this learning community, we're in that process of launching the learning community now. We're looking at ensuring that we're showing people the how-to and the lessons learned and continued dialogue. The pledge itself has 5 components. The first is policies and systems, and it's predicated on creating a specific racial and ethnic equity policy. It's not a DEIA policy. It can be a component of a DEIA policy. A DEIA policy does not count Black and brown people. It speaks to including, and I've already talked about my feelings about inclusion. So it's about this policy, because once you have policy, you have action. Once you have action, you can measure it. Once you can measure it, you can report it, and people can tell you whether you're doing it right. So this is, to me, the most fundamental shift I would like to see. I would like to see our 80 members as of this morning have a policy. That would be a huge metric for growth. The second is people, leadership, and organization structure. So the idea that recruitment is important. Yes, and where we recruit people from. So Jose doesn't have to change his name to Joe. My son doesn't have to change his photo if it's on, so that he looks more clean shaven than he'll ever be. Recruitment is huge. Retention is a bigger problem that we're not addressing. We're not having people feel like they belong, where they can contribute, where they can be encouraged, where they can be somebody. But much as I've been to Georgetown last week, I'm at GW, I need to go and walk and go into HBCUs in the area, so that we're creating leaders not just from traditional places where we get leaders. No disrespect, but to do it more inclusive. The other aspect of this is people don't talk about succession plan. Who's going to take your job? Is it going to be somebody you've nurtured, somebody you brought on, somebody you were in college with, who you went to the same church with? Who is best for your organization? And how do we intentionally make it beyond that 4 to 6% BIPOC leaders in international development? 3, all of this is talk without culture. So ethos is fundamentally real. It's more palpable than any word. This is where the belonging comes. It's where the leaders have to take responsibility for believing their tribe, for forgiving themselves for what they haven't been able to do, for not being so scared about liability. 4 is accountability. And this is that basis of measurements and reporting. And 5 is communications and transparency. It's that talk, where it doesn't matter your color or your background. Talk about it. Talk about it with defensiveness, talk about it with aggression, talk about it with strategy, talk about it with respect. Unless you're able to talk about it, it doesn't exist. Each of these components are very systematically created. Each has a standard, each has a roadmap, each has values that you need in order to implement it. It has measures and it has outcomes. It's a no excuses policy. People who are well-intentioned stop at intention. I don't know how to do this. I wish I could. Well, so it's been created to create a sense of, tell me what I missed, how do I make it better? So this is also the pledge. As we evolve, we created a glossary, we created our own understanding of some of these high highly charged emotional terms, so try to do it as Webster-like as we could. We also then did an external review of the pledge and the glossary with 64 organizations in the industry. And from that, learned we needed to create a frequently asked question, especially about the journey, about measures about accountability. So we deadlines work. I mean, my daughter would have been here today except for her paper tomorrow. That's you. We created a deadline for organizations to join the agreement. We launched officially on February 1st. We had originally said March 22nd, but extended it to March 31st, where we invited first endorsers to join us, very much like first responders, who has the courage to step up first. It's an illustrious list of organizations. It's the big and the small. It's also one of the first initiatives in this industry that for-profits and nonprofits are working with equal. It's also we've also considered a small organization, a mid-sized organization, or a large organization, and said it's okay to take from the pledge what works for you, but beyond the journey. So we've got 5 more that have come on since the end of the month. I'm going to create another artificial deadline at some point so we can get another wave. But it's incredibly motivating. It tells us that these very different organizations at different points of their development are willing to put their name on the line. And this is a lot more than I expected. I've been an entrepreneur my whole life. When you're an entrepreneur, you don't stop at the end result, you stop with this passion. You don't know where it's gonna go. You keep chasing it. And it's like, oh shit, this is real. So now I have to figure out what I'm going to do when I grow up. Because now there's an obligation to really change that cooling. So I'm absolutely excited that this is where our industry is. I'm aware of how little we know, how much we have to do, and how little time we have. But the goal really is to keep talking and to integrate racial and ethnic equities indicators into the systems of these organizations.
Just a check card and write about it. Indira, thank you so much for that. We're gonna have to open the floor to questions that I would take the prerogative and ask some myself. The first thing that jumped out to me during your presentation was how do we invite stakeholders, I mean, at the university level, faculty, alums, students, staff, and certainly in international development, and even wider group. How do we invite stakeholders who are resistant or even sometimes hostile to these sorts of discussions, to join the conversation? Because it does seem to me like it's you want to create that safe space where people can kind of voice both their concerns and anxieties and things they're having difficulty sort of unpacking or coming to grips with themselves. How do we invite people who are resistant to that to the conversation? People who are critical to kind of sustaining or building really and sustaining equity in organizations.
You start with the easy one. I think the first thing is lack of judgment. I think anytime we come into a conversation, we have determined what the other's experiences and what their position is. And we're already clear about us being right. And so in any discussion, it's not necessarily for me to determine the answer, but to figure out the right question. So if we can take away from, I'm right and I'm here to tell you you're wrong, which is how we create the discussion. And you'll notice how I created the discussion. I don't know everybody's position. I'm guessing that most people will be on the same side of DEIA or REE as I am. However, I introduced you to me. I told you why this was important. I didn't say what I had to take away from you. I had you understand why this was important to me. So when we can be human with each other and be vulnerable, we're able to have a conversation that is where the balance has shifted. The other aspect of it is in terms of asking the questions. When we're trying to get to an answer, we're trying to get to the right answer. But the question you just asked, if you pose it to somebody who's resistant, or what would it take for us to have this conversation? How can we engage in a way that allows me to understand your position, not for you to understand my position? So I think you really have to put yourself in the position of the other. My daughter, it's a good thing she's not here because she'd be embarrassed at how many times I'm invoking her. But she would fight the fight. She was in high school fighting every fight about equity. And I would constantly tell her, it's not about you being right, it's about you being heard. And so I think it's changing how we present ourselves that we allow the other to be heard.
Thank you. I'm gonna do one more, I think, if that's okay. I'm curious about the field of international development specifically, or so many students who go into the field. What are the obstacles that are unique to that field in sort of that stand in the way of racial and ethnic equity?
I have to remember this is on record.
In contrast, maybe to security studies
we're a field of do-gooders. And it also comes when you're a field of do-gooders, you think you're right. Okay. And when you think you're right, you have a vision of what the process is, or who can implement that process. And that's where we fail, in my opinion. So I'm going to address it from two perspectives. I grew up in Calcutta, as I said, and I know for a fact the people I grew up with are way more savvy, more brilliant, more competent than I will ever be. We don't give that respect when we go in and design programs. We don't even consult the people we work with. Here, we don't believe in cultural fluency. We've got an ethnocentric model of how we're going to do development. Who fits into an ethnocentric model to deliver that development? Are people that come based on, I think USAID is trying to reduce its barriers to entry and its qualification requirements. So to do a USAID project, you have to have, let's go to the extreme, right? You've got to have 5 years of working in country, you've got to have 10 years of working in international development, you have to have a master's, you have to be able to, I'll tell you, I've had a chief of fire, he fired because he didn't wear a belt. I mean, it's pretty ludicrous in terms of how prescriptive you have to be to work in international development. And that's got to change. So I think the good news is organizations, particularly organizations that are human-centric and design-centric, are looking at cultural fluency and how do they get that from the population that's here that will help us translate and encourage participation in country. I have a colleague who has, her name is Pat, and she said when she went into a country, she was received as my sister, by the partners in country because she's Black. And that hesitation of being formal, of being different, and when you go in and impose yourself onto a situation, versus bringing people who can speak to that situation from lived experience, is shifting. So I think the barriers coming into this field is how can you authentically speak to your experience in international development in your soft skills as much as in your professional disciplines.
Thank you. I have a lot more questions, but I will open the floor. Is there any from the audience?
I have a question. Ollie, if no one else has questions, I'm ready to jump in. Thank you so very much. This is so inspiring, and especially your vision and your confidence that you can make it happen. I want to push back a little bit on your response to Graham's first question, because I think we all know that we're in a moment. We're in a moment not just because of George Floyd and 2020. We are also in a moment in this particular industry because of Samantha Power and her strategic vision for USAID. And she's made it abundantly clear, and she said very specifically, we're going to move away from the usual suspects. We're not going to contract with the usual contractors, and we expect to have a greater diversity of people and organizations working on aid projects. So in many respects, this makes the job of CREED much easier because these organizations can readily see, oh my goodness, this is in our strategic interest. We have to demonstrate, and we have to demonstrate quickly, a commitment to this agenda so that we can continue to receive AID contracts. So my question to you is, it's wonderful what you said about, being really open to wherever people are. But what if they're only at the table to check this box? And what happens when this administration is over and we have a new AID administrator who doesn't have this perspective? Thanks.
No, very good question. I appreciate it. So she has made equity her highest internal priority. She's also made locally led development, working with new underutilized partners, her highest priority. So it's almost that this moment is not just for BIPOC in the US, but also for new partners from vulnerable populations in development. I appreciate that. I get it's short-lived. I get that we've got midterm elections coming up. We've got a lot of change that's brewing. The idea of working with new partners was also used the last go around. Localization has been around for a while. The element that we have to utilize is systemic, right? I think to the final part of your question, what if this is not sincere? It's not. I mean, it's not. And it doesn't matter. I don't care what the handle is. I am going to open the door. And even if there is one person in this room that says, I can open that door as well, success. It's not about sincerity anymore. It's ultimately about material change. And if I think about that from a composition perspective for a moment, MCC has its first DEIA lead. USAID has its first DEIA lead. DFC hasn't got there yet, but the person who's fueling it is more than capable in the position she's in. State Department has the ambassador. These are new positions. The other aspect of it is within the implementing partner community. One of the things I'm asked a lot is, well, how do I demonstrate equity in my proposals? So when I started DTS, it was add women and start in our proposals. That was the flavor of the day. You know, at the end of the sentence, you could say, and women. Really? Okay, we got from a sentence to a paragraph, to a cross-cutting theme, to a strategy. Okay. So I've done it before. I've seen the pitfalls, I've fallen many times. And I'm only one of an army of us that believes in it. And so similarly, as these positions are created, people are coming into positions that are different than they were a year ago. And so that's one. I mean, that's one part of how the change, regardless of motivation, can be systematized and be sustainable. We did a project in Afghanistan in DTS, and my staff was up in arms about doing it because it was an organizational development project and we were agenda for. Okay, what was the problem? We sat down and had a conversation. We've got to go in and work with the Ministry of Finance, and we've got to do job descriptions. This has nothing to do with equity. No, actually, it has everything to do with equity. This was 20 years ago. We may not catch that generation of women because the job descriptions were not inclusive. But the way we wrote those new job descriptions made it possible for the next generation of women to apply. That's what we're going to do with recruitment and retention. And with the Learning Hub, with these 5 components, we took a year to develop the pledge. We took a year and we took a month and a half, 2 months to get these 80 signatories. I have another year, very realistic about timing. Another year and then some. In this next year, we're going to build this learning community where we're going to do one component at a time for 2 months. We're going to pull reference materials about how to build that REE policy, how to do recruitment and retention. But then I want member organizations to speak up about what are their lessons learned, what are their questions, what are the best practices they've utilized, what are their stumbling blocks. I want to put it up on the website. I want to make it public source. And then at the end of the 2 months per component, we're going to have 2 learning events. We're going to get the leaders in a room and say what worked, what didn't work, what did you learn, what do you need to learn. Very safe, behind closed doors conversation that you don't have with staff. And then we do a larger event with the membership where we talk about what we've learned. So one person at a time, without care for sincerity and changing the Kool-Aid. And thanks to Samantha, we're able to be positioned to make this fashionable again.
So where are you in the recruitment stage of universities? What's the role that you see us play?
I'll take you now. We've understood the interest right now. You know, when we started, I was very focused on implementing partners. And honestly, that was because that's where I knew I could push my network. And once I had that critical mass, we could see what 2.0 became. So given that we're at that in-between stage, and there's a tremendous interest in the ecosystem, USAID had asked if we wanted money, and I said no, because I didn't want to be beholden to their money. I wanted us to have the freedom. And so it's a completely volunteer-led, sweat equity-based initiative. But in that space, we've created 3 levels. We've got the member signatories who sign the pledge and are part of the learning community and become members of CREED. We have affiliate signatories who are governments, who are academia, foundations, large global organizations that have divisions that are part of international development, who sign the pledge, but they don't become members. And finally, the allies of CREED, which is where I think it's a good fit, where you can certainly align with the values and the pledge. You can choose to take parts of it, and you don't sign it, but you become an ally. I personally have resisted the term ally, except in this scenario, because in this scenario, it works for me. It's an ally, you're not the actor, the primary actor. And the reason I've resisted the term ally is I want to be the actor. I don't care what the issue is. If it's about equity, I can stand behind that fight, not be on the side of that fight. But in this scenario, we need everybody to stand along the fight. And so I'm happy to follow up with you. And we're updating our website. We had the conversation yesterday to make sure that's on the website. It's a simple process. You submit a form. It comes to our very small membership committee. We vet the organization. We make sure it's real, and we put you to work. Yeah.
So I was just looking a little bit more on how you verify these organizations are wanting change. I feel like a lot of the time there are a couple things that we're worried about. One, I think that we want to have the hope that these organizations want to fulfill these responsibilities, but I think it's the lack of trust that has been a part of the system for so long. And so I was just wondering a little how you could describe more how you know that these organizations are very committed to this proposal.
So we designed this from that perspective, right? I think the lack of trust and my being cynical about it, as much as hopeful. So the idea that it was leaders and the leaders would sign it. So I don't care how big the organization is. The leader has to show up at the meetings. So I use that as very informal coaching amongst us. So not only are they aware, not only are they participants in this discussion, they're signing it. When a leader signs it, it goes through all kinds of checks and balances before an organization releases it for signature. So that means a lot of thought and deliberation and consideration of how far they can take it has gone into it. Check. 2, your staff knows you've signed it. All of a sudden, you're accountable to your staff. And I make no bones about it. I'm not trying to create any kind of rebellion. I'm trying to create voice. So if the leader has said it's okay for me to talk about this, it's okay for the staff to say, hey, where are we with this? And if you're going to do this with accountability, you're already reporting internally. We were intentional in saying this is not prescriptive. We're intentional in saying come where you are, but come. The third is the public accountability. When you signed it, you see Tetra Tech is on it, or you see IBI is on it. So when Tetra Tech signs it, a competitor will say, hey, Deloitte's looking and saying probably, hey, Tetra Tech signed it. They're this mammoth organization. They have these 6 operating units that are international. They've got the mining. How do they work that out? So I now have a talking point that I can take to a Deloitte to say, I'm not picking organizations, but Deloitte is looking at it as well. But it's that public accountability. The third is now as we bring in allies, and USAID says, look, USAID has said we welcome this. The RFP says right in equity. Well, people are writing to say, hey, do you have some standard language we can say about CREED in our proposals and that we're a member? Well, can you give me an example of what you've done? And I'm happy to help you think about it. So it was intentional to make the leaders accountable, make the leaders accountable to staff and to the market. And it's incremental. We're where we are from a lack of effort and a lot of effort. And that'll continue. It's okay to make small steps as long as we keep moving.
Thank you so much. It's very wonderful. And as you look in the audience, and who's on your side, I'm one of those people. So yeah, I had a couple of questions. One, are you aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals and other similar initiatives within the public multilaterals and nonprofits? And the other question is just with what's happening in Russia, there's been this affirmation that ethno-nationalism, the rise of populism is going to just erupt even worse than it already has. And I'm a member of a nonprofit who's pulled itself out of Russia and hurting the people in Russia who were members. And I think we haven't seen the last of this kind of alignment in the world. I wonder if that's creeping into your territory at all.
Thank you. We're all in the space of international development with the SDG goals or other goals that are related to equity or organizations. What we said is we'll be supportive. It's all about intersectionality. It's all of us participating in the same effort. So we're very, very small. We're incredibly ambitious, as you see, but we're such a small part of this universe that, we're keeping our egos in check, but we're keeping the effort moving forward, and we're happy to align where it makes sense in terms of the value we can bring or that we can learn. The interesting thing about, the two things that I think a lot, I used to be glued, try to watch everything and feel the pain of it in this time where we're feeling the pain of so much. And it gets overwhelming. And, we've been on the side of many times in the world, in politics, in aftermath of crisis, where the people suffer as a result of the politics, right? And that hurts because I'll tell you, when we did gender, we had the most amount of effectiveness in places outside of the former Soviet Union countries, because the sense of identity was so muted in those parts versus other parts of the world where there's been revolution and activism and passion more than anything else. So to know that the backlash to people who have been brainwashed to believe a certain way is painful. The other aspect that I think a lot about is, again, the aspect of equity. Who's getting stopped in trying to get out of Ukraine? Why is this getting as much attention as it is when other crises have had the same kind of devastation? So there's a lot of talk in different communities that I walk in and out of, where there's pain in brown and black communities about why this white conflict is getting the benefit of the pain of so many, right? It doesn't matter because people are suffering. It's a note, right? That equity seeps, or lack of equity seeps into how we do it. The other reality is it has nothing to do with people, as I said, who suffer, but the gain of a few, of a very few. That paradigm, regardless of what you call the political structure or the system, is what's universal in greed, right? And it's the human failing in my mind.
I just wanted to ask you to talk more about the ethnic equity in development part, because I feel like you talked a lot more about the racial part and how a US-based organization can work with local organizations and try to realize that there's hierarchy in different ethnic groups in different countries and how to work with the less advantaged ones.
Absolutely. So I'm a privileged Indian, right? I know a privileged Indian. I didn't say privileged Indian American. So in my background, I've come from privilege. So I don't know development. Okay, I have not had needs that go to what we traditionally associate with water, food, infrastructure, health. I can sit on this side of the table and see as a development practitioner, I can personally see the gradations in a country in terms of its economy or its rural-urban divide or the different tribes or the different cultures. Honestly, from a design perspective, from a programmatic perspective, we're getting a lot more sophisticated in the last 15, 20 years. I think that there is attention being paid because you're going to be more competitive. I'm going to say the design is better, the implementation is still suffering. Okay. Because implementation is predicated on respect. And the basis of that respect is saying to your counterpart with mutual respect for that person being equal to you, what do you need? I was listening to somebody speak the other day about latrines in India. You know, these the toilets that kind of pop up on street corners when we have public events, right? So apparently they thought that would, from a development perspective, that would be a really useful way to handle that in a rural part of India. It's being used as storage. Okay. So when you don't connect to the context and ensure that the input is truly heard, then translated, and then put into implementation, you have failures. So that's the incentive for implementing partners to act. From an inclusion perspective, if you were to apply as a brown person to a development organization in today's world, I would say there's an incredible amount of diversity at the staff level. There's a significant amount more in the mid to junior program level, and then mid to even senior administrative and operations level. Okay, so if you look at the bridge survey, which next time I can send you a link, I'm sure Graham can also pull it, but it gives you the data on there's tremendous diversity in the middle, lower and middle management. It's only as you get higher, there is a good balance of gender equity in our industry. It doesn't translate into BIPOC at the leadership level. So at this point, I think that our staff, because of numbers, because of the intelligence that we are gaining ourselves as organizations, that our results matter, our payments, which are now predicated on different kinds of performance metrics, matter. We've got to improve not only how we design, but how we implement and how, thanks to the administrator of USA, engage. We're not at the point that we'll actually share power. It's always going to be our money. And that's okay. We've got to know that. I mean, we can't be completely naive, but we can improve how we work.
Thank you. I'm gonna ask another question, if that's okay. We have a little more time. You know, we can imagine other different forms of equity, or equity attached to different forms of identity and affinity groups, LGBTQ. You mentioned gender. You know, how do you see these overlapping with Creed's like sort of more narrowly focused mission? How does Creed, you know, get involved or support these?
This was a huge struggle for us. I mean, I based my career on gender equity, and I've been very categorical and have good fights about no, this is not about gender equity. This is about racial and ethnic equity. It's also about racial and ethnic equity from a perspective of intersectionality. So similar to the way I introduced myself, I don't know if I mentioned this. I live with an invisible disease. Right? I have advanced breast cancer. Tomorrow is going to be my 15-year cancer anniversary. I still go for treatment every 3 weeks. Why is that important? In an organization, I need to know that I am not going to have a cap on my salary because I'm a woman. I need to know that I can access and be part of the vote at the board level or at the leadership level as a brown woman. I need to know that my promotion is not predicated on the fact that I have cancer, right? So even if I'm leading with being a brown woman, it doesn't mean my other aspects of my identity are less important. When we have talked about equity, as the Bridge Survey very clearly articulates, it's about white women. It's not about brown and black women. Because if it was, then we'd have more than 4% BIPOC women as leaders in this industry, when we have a significant number, almost equal number of white men and women in the leadership positions. So I have to be very, and the final reason that I've been really adamant about it is measurements. Because you can look really good from a DEIA perspective. Yes, participant. But not when you say, does that hold true if you're black or brown? So there was a lot of angst about that in the year of development. I learned how to be a little bit more diplomatic in how I was trying to communicate that. But I realized at the end of the day, the answer is it has to be, you have to choose what you want to measure. And if we leave it as a broad swath, then we're not going to measure where we want to move the needle in this case.
Can I follow up? And maybe a last question if there's no one else. I think you speaking again about your own identity and how you opened the talk was inspiring. But I wonder if you could advise us, how do we encourage students or sort of young development practitioners to kind of reflect critically and on their own upbringing, their own background, and the ways that can actually sort of inform a career that is helping us move towards diversity, helping us move towards equity.
I love that question. Absolutely love the question. We're trained not to bring our full self into every situation. And just take that in for a moment. We're trained. Okay. So what your question is saying is, how do we reprogram to say it's okay, it's absolutely okay to be just who you are and all of that, and bring all of that into a scenario, into any situation. I mean, if there's one reason why I'm doing this, whether it's CREED or DTS or whatever else I've done in my life, it's if my son with his turban and his beard chooses to be a janitor, I want him to have that opportunity. If he wants to take the White House and sit inside it, brown terrorists, what have you now, be inside it, I want him to have that opportunity. It's incredibly personal. I mean, each of us is enough. We don't have to be less than who we are. We don't have to pretend to be more than who we are. And fundamentally, right now, I mean, this is a good time for this class, the next class. The moment you can still be Jose, you don't have to be Joe when you apply. I can't speak to how trends change, but right now, I would urge you to do wherever you sit in your career, wherever you sit in your person, see yourself. They're very simple exercises you can do to hear yourself. Because we're programmed and trained a certain way to act and react, we don't give voice to elements that we're afraid to bring up. And we may be afraid from a perspective of judgment. We may have been trained that if I speak loudly, I'm going to be treated this way. If I do this, I'm going to be treated that way. I would say as you go to bed tonight, just see yourself. See all of yourself. Own parts of yourself that are hidden, parts that you bury, parts that you feel you need to hide, and feel the joy of being yourself. I think that is the most powerful thing you can do for yourself. When you can see yourself, recognizing the world we live in, similar to the question you asked, it doesn't matter what the other person thinks. I own me, and I will stand for what I believe in. And I pray that I'll have the ability to. And know that I'll have your back. I mean, whether it's me or Graham or somebody else, there are people who believe in you.
That's really a wonderful way to close, I think. Difficult conversations that we're having, but it's nice to end on an uplifting note. So if everyone would thank me, or to thank me, you don't have to thank me. Join me in thanking Indira, Kaur, Ahluwalia for joining us today for our talk. Please check out the Inclusive Excellence Week website. We have stuff going on all week, including the rest of the day today, film screening tonight, and join us again. Hope to see you around.